The views and opinions expressed in the following program are those of the participants and do not necessarily reflect those of KSMQ Public Service Media Incorporated or its assigns.
This week on Garden Connections, we're preparing a garden. How green is your thumb? We're taking your calls and questions. You're watching Garden Connections. Stay with us. Welcome to Garden Connections. I'm Amy Whitaker. Thank you for joining us. I'm happy to introduce Jim and Cindy, who know a thing or two about starting a garden. We welcome your participation in preparing for spring planting. Call in and pose your question. The number is there at the bottom of your screen. So, Jim and Cindy, when it comes to starting a garden, what is the most important thing to do when you get ready to start your garden?
Well, for many people, it's trying to decide what kind of garden they want. You know, if you live in an apartment, it would be a container garden. Or if you have a house with a lot, of course, you can have a vegetable garden and a flower garden. And, you know, of course, with flower garden, there's annuals and perennials. And, oh my, what are all the different kinds of gardens there?
Herb gardens and water gardens and bog gardens and rain gardens.
So when choosing the type of plants you want to put in your garden, what are things you need to consider?
Yeah. Well, with a lot of the plants, you need to look at their recommendation for sun or shade. Certainly in the vegetable garden, you know, most plants do take full sun, or at least 3/4 of a day sun. I know a lot of us, like myself, have a lot of trees in our yard, and we've had to move to our front yard, actually, to have our vegetable garden. So it's certainly helpful to look at the tags and to know the requirements of each plant for sun or shade type things.
How about for water needs, Cindy?
For water needs, you're going to want to look at what you're wanting to grow. Tomatoes are something that you're going to want a good source of water for, where some of your foxgloves will want it a little bit more dry. And of course your pond gardens are going to want water.
All right, so we're starting from scratch here. So we're learning where...
Starting from the ground up.
Exactly. Where do we start with the soil?
The soil is huge, isn't it? I mean, it's the most important thing of the garden. If you don't have good soil, why even? I mean, you just are not even setting yourself up for success.
If you don't have good soil, you're going to make it good.
Yeah.
And that's where our amendments come in.
Yeah, yeah. Now, most of us, when we go out and dig in the soil, you know, it's hard. It's compacted. And to actually plant something,
it's going to look something like this.
Yeah, and this is exactly here how it's going to look. It's like that there. And I think that's a real common way that soils look and stuff.
Kind of clumpy and hard.
Yeah, and of course you can mix it up and get it loose, but halfway through the summer again, it's going to get compacted. And of course the roots just don't like that at all. They need a good growing medium to grow and to prosper. So what we tell people to do with things like that is, if your soil is like that, and it's the most important thing, you would add compost to it. And on most gardens, you would dig it up, and maybe you would add like an inch of compost over the top of the garden, and then the next most important thing is maybe something like sphagnum peat moss, and there too you would add like an inch over the soil. And then the fun part is, of course, mixing it up. And when you mix it up, you know, it becomes all of a sudden this rich soil with you know, air in it and organic matter, and all of a sudden you can plant things in there and really get a good crop and really set yourself up for success.
Your compost is going to add some nutrition that your plants are going to be needing. Your sphagnum moss is going to lighten the soil so that your plants' roots also need a little bit of air. If they're compacted, they're going to die. And so you need that lightness to get the roots going deep as they can go. They can get some air, they can get the water, they can get the nutrition that they need.
And every year we get people in who, they'll say, we'll ask them, well, how was your garden last year? Did you have success with it? Or if they're starting a new garden, what's your soil like? And this is so important to start from the bottom up. Soil is number one when it comes to productivity for your garden.
All right, and I see you have some other samples here of like potting soil and potting mix. What's the difference between those type of soils and what you would put in like a garden in the ground?
Yeah, well, the potting soil here, and that's just a little, this is an all-purpose potting soil. You can buy it at every garden center and store, I think, in town. And it's probably got some black peat dirt in it and some organic matter. And it's good soil. We like to use that for containers for.
It tends to be a little heavy for like hanging baskets.
Yep, yeah, and but it can be good though for things that dry out quickly. Maybe they use a lot of water, like tomatoes, or people that use pots for tomatoes. Certainly, those types of things that drink a lot of water, we recommend using maybe an all-purpose mix, or mixing it a little bit with something a little lighter too. And of course here we got the potting mix, and this is
the
what
soilless mix.
Soilless mix. And in the last 10 years ago, nobody knew what soilless mix was, and now
Sphagnum moss, perlite, vermiculite, moss.
So basically, water holding capacity plus drainage.
Yeah, and just. And the advantage of soilless mix there, you can see really light. I mean, and of course the advantage of that are numerous. You can feed a lot with it, and the roots can grow really good, and you can get an incredible crop out of it. And when it'll
excellent for containers.
Yeah.
Hanging baskets.
Yeah.
Stuff that you would maybe need a little bit lighter soil for placement or for the plants themselves.
Yeah.
Okay, so now we've talked about the mix of components in the soil. As far as adding nutrition to the soil, other than the compost, is there anything else you can add to provide some extra nutrients for the plants right away when you're working with your soil?
Well, one thing you might want to do first is a soil test. And check and see where your soil is at. If you're high in nitrogen, you don't want to be adding any more. You'll get big green plants, no fruits or flowers. So you want to make sure you kind of check that out. Otherwise, you've got some good basic garden fertilizer, 8-10-8. Perfect for gardens, for the fruits, for the vegetables, flowers. Works great. And then you've got your standby water-soluble, we won't say the name.
Everybody knows
Everybody
it.
knows it.
Yeah.
Mix with water. Water it into your garden.
The blue stuff.
The blue stuff.
The blue stuff. Wonderful.
And of course, too, and people forget the importance of fertilizing every year too. They'll come in and they'll say, "Gee, my rhubarb didn't do good last year, and this year I'm not getting nothing at all from it," or my strawberries or raspberries seem to be declining. And you need to feed them every year.
Yes.
I mean, even a couple times a year with those granular type fertilizers. Just so important.
They're growing.
Yeah.
They're taking nutrition out of the earth, and you need to get something back in there for it.
We have young kids come out to the store sometimes, and we'll talk about what's important for plants, and how it's similar to them. And plants need food. I mean, that's a base. They need a food to grow, and then they also need the water, and they also need the nurturing. And I wish I had a scissors, because I would like to say too, sometimes you got to clean plants up a little bit too, and
give them a haircut.
Trim them up, and take off the dead flowers, and they like that too. And of course, plants like to be comfortable. They don't like to be hot. If you're starting out gardening and you're going to put your garden up on the south side of your house, I'd say, let's move it somewhere where it's not so hot, because plants do get stressed out when it gets hot.
That's one of Jim's favorite things when he walks into a greenhouse and we're working in there and he says, "Are you hot?" It's like, "Well, yes." And he says, "So are the plants." And we'll turn the fans on.
So plants like to be like humans, comfortable. Feed them, give them water, all those things. And they'll produce for you, of course.
All right, so we've touched on soil. We've touched a little bit on location. What are some types of plants that can grow in the sun versus some types that can grow more in the shade?
Well, and when we get into the vegetable plants, of course, those are all predominantly sun. No shade on vegetable plants that I can think of.
And normally they
at all.
say, 6 to 8 hours of full sun.
Yeah.
Most vegetables, and I can't think of too many that do like the shade, possibly the cold crops, cabbage, broccoli, Brussels sprouts will take it a little bit shadier. They like the cooler weather. Otherwise, full sun for vegetable gardens.
But you get into flowers now, like annual flowers and perennials. Oh my! I mean,
we have them.
Yeah, and we can touch on shade first a little bit there. The
impatiens and begonias, Brorelia, Torinia.
Yeah.
What is the difference between a perennial and an annual plant?
Good one. An annual is a plant that will grow. It will flower. When it gets cold, it will die. It's done. The perennial, you'll plant it now. It'll grow. It'll flower. And the cold weather will come and it'll cut back to the ground. In the spring, I don't have to plant it again. It will come up on its own in Minnesota.
So, when you're crossing your fingers for in Minnesota, what does that mean? What do we have to look for when we're looking for plants that will come back every year?
We are a zone 4.
Okay.
The United States is divided, I think the world is divided into about 11 zones. And so the North Pole is like a 0, and we're at a 4. So we can take some things, but there are plants that we cannot survive. They will not survive our winter. And so you kind of, when you're buying your perennials, plants that you want to come back, you want to look at the tags and make sure it's a 4 or lower, and it should come back.
Okay, back to light needs a little bit. You mentioned 6 to 8 hours would be considered like full sun. Mm-hmm. So breaking down into if you have an area that only has 2 hours or 4 hours or all day sun, how would you classify the exposures?
Mm-hmm. Well, certainly anything under 4 hours.
Go something more shade.
Yeah, more shade.
The impatiens, the begonias. For perennials, you've got bleeding hearts and hostas, astelbes, things like that. And a lot of, again, the tags will tell you, is this a full sun, a part sun, or a full shade?
All right, we have Marty, I believe from Grand Meadow, who's got a question for us. How do we prepare our soils if we have a problem soil? Like if you have a clay soil, what would you do? If you have a sandy soil, what would you do? Starting with clay?
Yeah, with clay there, you can try a small piece on your own. Just taking out a shovel and getting some of the compost and the sphagnum peat moss and mix
vermiculite,
it.
And that's another good one.
Vermiculite too.
Or some sand.
Yeah, and some sand too, and mix them together, and see how if it can combine and loosen that soil up. Otherwise, you might have to go a little raised on it there. And raised, you might have to get up a little higher than the ground level. If it's really wet and not conducive to mixing, you might have to add, get some good topsoil, and some compost and the peat moss, and actually raise your bed up.
If it's really a problem.
So many inches or so.
So try to mix in some different things and see if you can get the soil to amend.
Soil lighteners.
And if not, then do a raised garden, which has been a really popular term this year, starting a raised garden.
Yeah. exactly. And with sand, there, you'll no
Add
doubt
your
have
compost.
to add compost and good black soil to it, and that might be about it. Maybe some sphagnum. See how that is there. For sure, it'll be well drained.
Yes.
And lighter soil would be much better than heavier soil. Heavier soils, lots of times, the plants just don't grow well, and you enter into disease problems, and it can lead to insect problems. So the lighter the soil, the better when you can make it that way.
So just a nice light consistency soil that can hold moisture and provide those nutrients.
Correct.
All right. For more information, log on to ksmq.org and click on the Garden Connections. There you can see highlights of your favorite episodes, read the blogs, and submit your ideas. Call in right now and pose your question. The number is there at the bottom of your screen. Okay, so back to a few more questions. So we have figured out how to take care of our soil because everything starts from the ground up.
Yes.
We have kind of determined, you have to determine what kind of plants you want to plant, whether they be vegetables or flowers, perennial or annual. What kind of products could you maybe get on hand, go out to your garden center and find to prepare yourself to care for these plants?
Well, on the vegetable garden, you're certainly, well, it depends what you're growing to care for the plants, but you certainly need your fertilizer, your basic fertilizer, your 10-10-10 fertilizer, something that you can put down at the beginning of the year and then maybe midway through the year again. If you're growing tomatoes, you're going to need stakes. You're going to need
tomato cages.
Or cages, yes, to hold them up. They're wild guys, and they need to be staked
They
up.
don't do so well on the ground.
No,
So you want to kind of get them up.
Yeah. And for tomatoes, that's everybody's favorite, I think, here. We grow more tomatoes in the state, and it's important to keep them up, to keep the airflow going between the plants, and keep the tomatoes off the ground. Those are always big issues here, and of course we all want to have a good crop of tomatoes. So those things help. And
another thing too is the mulch. Get some mulch when you're doing any of the gardening. Getting that mulch underneath those plants keeps the moisture in, keeps the weeds down, and you're going to have healthier plants, especially with the decomposable mulch that will go back into the earth.
And you just get better soil that way, of course. So
that helps your sandy soil.
Yeah. Mulch is really big, and it too for a lot of things that are pole, like peas and beans and cucumbers. You can have trellises in your garden too,
or even fences. A lot of those will climb a fence, so you could put a
Yeah.
fence and let them climb up that.
Especially if you're tight on space or something there. And plus, they're easier to pick, of course. Yeah.
Well, we have a question. Tim, what is your question?
Yeah, my wife is planting a garden, and she's done one a couple of years in a row. Well, we plowed under a bunch of grass in order to make this, and the grass was very weed-like. It's very resilient. The grass keeps coming up, and she wants to put like a weed and total grass vegetation killer, but I'm curious if this is going to be a problem when we actually start to plant plants in it.
I think your best bet when you're starting with a grassy area and you're going to turn it into a vegetable garden or a flower garden is if you can get out there and kill everything. A total weed killer, and then leave that area for 2 weeks. Work that ground up really good, and you should be good then. And again, when you get in there with your planting, mulching will help, keep those weeds down. But you almost need to, when you're starting from a grassy area, is to kill all that grass there first. Or dig it out, which I did for my daughter on her slope hill that we couldn't kill. Mom had to dig it out.
Yeah.
I hear a lot of talk about like pre-emergent herbicides. How does that work with your garden?
Yeah, great question there. There's some, of course, the exciting one around here is, of course, the corn gluten, which is a organic pre-emergent herbicide. And, read the label there, because you would think that it would keep all seeds from germinating, but it really doesn't. It just a lot of the smaller seeds, and a lot of them like peas and beans and corn, you can use it. And of course, with the pre-emergent herbicides, only certain weeds, it's going to keep them from germinating, and only certain ones too. You won't get 100%, but you may get 50%. And
it doesn't kill the weeds that are already growing. That's one thing. It just prevents the germination.
And it won't kill anything, any garden plants already growing either, or any flower plants already, or anything coming back from root, of course. Yeah.
So if you've got a weed problem and they're already up, the pre-emergent won't help. How do you control those, like when you've got your tomatoes and your lettuce and your peppers and everything in there, and you're still getting those pesky weeds up and about? Other ways to prevent it? Mulch, I know you had mentioned. Anything else?
The old one is hoeing or cultivating. My way is I just dig those roots out. So every day if I go out and dig a few more out of there, eventually I don't have so many. I get my mulch in there, and that helps control it. So it's kind of persistence.
But if you're going to spray, wait 2 weeks before planting your garden if you spray something that's just going to kill everything.
That's going to kill everything.
Okay.
And there too, read the directions carefully on anything you use, and make sure you follow those directions. It may take 15 minutes or so to read it, but it's well worth it. And we all have seen the yards around town where once in a while there's brown spots all around it, and it's
the wrong chemical.
Yes, it was the wrong chemical. And weed and grass killers kill grasses too. So, you want to be careful and make sure you read the directions very closely.
All right. Well, we have a question from Jan. Jan, what is your question?
Well, I just planted 3 blueberry bushes, and I checked them the other day after it rained. I mean, they look just beautiful. And I looked at them today, and they look like frost has hit them or something. They're all brown. So what did I do wrong?
I don't know without looking at it.
Yeah, it's been pretty mild temperatures. Sometimes you get cold temperatures, and that can, burn something a little bit or make it turn a little brown.
It could be stress from planting it. Yeah. Sometimes that'll happen with plants, transplanting something that's been in a pot, and then you dump it into the ground, and the stress of moving it will sometimes do that. Yeah. I would say be patient with it. Very possibly it'll be coming back for you, or you can find a transplant solution that has a little fertilizer in there, a little iron in it to help the plant shock.
Yeah. And we always recommend when planting, like raspberries or anything, blueberry bushes or any shrubs, having that extra bag of compost in your garage, so you can take a shovelful and put it in the bottom of the hole and mix it up really good. And any other soil amendments. If the soil is
heavy.
Little
bone meal.
Yeah.
Anything with roots likes bone meal.
Yeah.
Well, blueberries like it a little acidic too, don't they?
Yes, they do.
So will your compost help acidify a bit?
Not significantly. That's where you kind of want to get into your aluminum sulfate. That'll help. Blew them up
with aluminum sulfate. Okay, we have another caller. Jane, what is your question?
My question is regarding some of the problems in my garden this year are the striped gophers, and it seems that they're just running rampant, and I was wondering if it's true that if you put a stick of like spearmint gum in the hole that will give them a stomachache and they leave. If that's true, I want to try it.
I would say try it and let us know how it works. There's so many different little old remedies that you can, and that is one that I've got a book at home, 1001 Old Time Remedies, and that one's in there with the gum.
Yeah. But with gophers, though, I'm not sure what gophers eat. Do any of you two know what they eat? Do they eat like the plant roots, or do they eat bugs or insects in the ground?
I think they're
I think
roots.
they're a little, yeah, maybe, or a little bit of everything.
Yeah.
Get a cat.
Get a cat. There you go.
on a leash. But yeah, hey, there are some things at the garden centers. Certainly, peanuts.
Pest repellents.
Poison peanuts for gophers.
Or things that just taste nasty.
They do, yeah. Or there's things too that you can spray on your yard too that will help repel them.
They're garlic-based, cayenne pepper, something like that, where it has a nasty taste.
We just hope it doesn't scare the homeowner out of their house. Yes.
Well, we are out of time for the night, and thank you for joining us. Now that you know how to start a garden, tune in next week when we'll talk about what you might want to plant in your garden. For everyone at Garden Connections, I'm Amy Whitaker. See you next week.